In this lecture, we're going to review clinical teaching, educational settings, and some of the roles of the family. I think a really interesting way to start this is to think about a comment that was made by our president in 2011 when he said that as we bring our school system into the 21st century, we also have to bring our schools into the 21st century. If we think about technology and how technology really integrates people through communication, through how they, not just how they communicate with each other, but how we basically do everything is hooked to technology. So we have to seize its full potential in the classroom. And while technology can be added during any component of the teaching cycle, it's good just to look at all the different components of the clinical teaching cycle. How while we do start with assessment, we move into planning of the task, implementation, we evaluate the student performance, and then we modify the assessment, and then we go back to assessment. And it is, always occurring. Some of the important qualities of clinical teaching require flexibility, continual decision making. It's planned for a unique student, can be accomplished in many educational settings. The textbook does a good job of discussing how individualizing education, but also at the same time making sure that you're meeting the components of, effective teaching. A very important aspect of teaching is promoting the cultural and linguistic diversity. Being a culturally responsive teacher is very important. You want to make sure that you have a welcoming atmosphere, and you always are collaborating with culturally diverse families and professionals. If you need assistance from people in your central office, other people in your building, you want to make sure that you're establishing an atmosphere that always respects your students, their families, and their cultures. If you look into the research, there's best practices involved with culturally responsive teaching, the demonstration of high expectations, implementation of culturally relevant instruction, establishing caring relationships, and then effective parent and community involvement. All of the research centers around those four broad bands. And this is a really good saying that says, no one cares how much you know until they see how much you care. I think that's important, and it's a good way to look at going into any type of teaching. There's a few examples here on the screen of culturally relevant instruction. There are three levels. When we were thinking about how to incorporate culturally responsive teaching into our teaching, tasks, instruction, assessment, etc. There are three levels. The exclusive level means that you teach aspects of diversity at the lowest level. The inclusive level means that you do add diversity content, but it retains a traditional structure. And then transformed level of culturally responsive teaching is when you actually challenge the traditional views and encourage a reconceptualization and new way of thinking. And it's just important to see that you are at least at the exclusive level and moving toward a transformed level in your planning, assessment, instruction, and those type components. Differentiated instruction is something that we talk a good deal about here at Winthrop. We talk about the qualities of clinical teaching in the general education classroom. Students have preferred ways of teaching to the strengths and weaknesses, and then using different strategies for the learners, using their likes, interests, talents, preference, interests, strengths, needs, all of those components. When we are looking at instructional strategies for the general education classroom, there's a few things that research has shown to be effective for students, and they are listed here on the screen as well as in your textbook. We are looking at the steps of a task analysis, and I know that that was in weekly assignment 1, but you guys did a good job of discussing the clear steps of the discrete skills that have to be taught in a task analysis, putting them in a logical teaching sequence, and making sure that when you teach them in a sequential order. Very important to know how to use task analytic instruction. Students need this step-by-step process. Most of what I've covered already is straight from your textbook. If you printed the guided notes or downloaded the guided notes that I placed on to Blackboard, they start with this slide, and you will have time to fill in some of the answers or the blanks that I left for you. So effective teaching is what we're talking about. And so as a special educator, you do have challenges. The challenges are finding methods of instruction that increase not only student performance but student learning, and also selecting effective curricula and planning lessons that allow a broad range of learners to be successful in reaching these ambitious goals. We've learned in these chapters that the importance of teaching to the students' likes, interests, needs, strengths, preferences, all of those. But how do we select appropriate methods of instruction and curricula when we are trying to reach a broad range of learners? So if I told you that you needed to increase your active student responding in your classroom, what do you think that means? Take a minute to think about it. So what percentage of class time do elementary school teachers spend in direct reading, teaching reading? So based on 24 elementary schools in 1990, which I know that's dated, but teachers spent less than 6%, less than an hour, directly teaching reading. In 1982, research found that students spent only 4 minutes a day reading aloud, answering questions, and reciting. You guys remember the reading down the row exercise? So what percentage of class time do elementary school students spend in repeated practice activities? 2%. While this data are very dated, it's just to show you perspective. Things probably have increased a little bit, and these times have changed. I'm not saying that this is completely accurate considering how old these data are. However, it's to show you that the percentage is not as high as it should be. So active student responding occurs each time a student makes an observable curriculum-related response to ongoing instruction. So ASR is actually not on-task behavior. Oftentimes we hear things about being on task. Well, when a student appears to be attending to a task at hand and is not being disruptive, we don't actually know that that student is on task, paying attention, or even engaged in what we are teaching them. A student can be judged as on task, but they're actually not even performing something related to what the teacher is doing. So it's important that we know that the definition of an active student response is when the student makes an observable curriculum-related response. Let's look at a few examples. Mr. Jefferson praises his fifth graders for working silently. Are these fifth graders on task, or are these fifth graders using ASR? Right, they're on task. Miss West told her students that they will earn a pizza party if all of them turn in 5 writing assignments with at least 90% of the items completed by Friday. Is that active student responding or on task? Active student responding. Those were pretty easy. Let's look at some more. Students who finish reciting the reading passage can work on the computer. Right, that's active student responding because it's observable. The student is reciting the passage to the teacher. Mrs. Jones is very pleased that all of her second graders show proper sitting and listening behavior while she is explaining this week's words. Right, this is on task. The students are not making an observable response to the curriculum. They're simply just sitting appropriately. Last one, Mr. Rogers gives Caught Being Good tickets to those students who completed their science worksheets. Active student responding. So let's think about it. On-task behavior isn't bad, it's just not as good as ASR. Active student responding, you are observing that the student is engaged in what you are teaching, and they're making responses. Lots of reasons to increase ASR, one being that there's a correlation between increased student engagement and academic achievement. There's a functional relationship has been shown between increasing ASR and achievement, and that means that a lot of research has been conducted. You can see all the citations there on the screen. When students are actively responding, their achievement levels are also increasing. This is very important. The second reason to use or to increase active student responding is it gives you very important feedback. As a teacher, if you say, students, do you understand? Most of your students are going to say yes. In fact, the answer may be no, but they're never going to say yes. Teachers smile when and are happy because the students have said yes. Students don't want to look bad because all of their peers around them seem to understand. And then if someone says no, well, are they fearing that they're told that they weren't paying attention? The student doesn't know he doesn't know. It looks easy when the teacher does it because watching and doing are not the same thing. Active student responding is important for you as the teacher because you get a lot of answers at one time by seeing all of your students. I'm going to give you a few strategies for increasing active student responding and then talk about some of the really quick and easy things to do in your classroom. And several studies have found increasing levels of on-task behavior or reducing off-task and disruptive behavior correlates the outcomes of increasing active student responding. On-task behavior should not be the goal of any intervention designed to increase achievement. However, increasing the degree in which students pay attention and do not disrupt others during instruction has important advantages. We're going to look at 4 strategies for increasing ASR. One is mediated scaffolding, choral responding, response cards, and then cooperative learning. So in this lecture, I'm modeling one of the strategies by mediated scaffolding as temporary support provided by the teacher. On new or difficult tasks, the scaffolding may be substantial at first and then it's faded over time. We looked at scaffolding instruction in the last weekly assignment. If you were giving a test using mediated scaffolding, what would that mean? Multiple choice, completion, fill in the blank, generation, short answer, essay. The type of response required of the learner varies. Selection would be multiple choice, completion would be fill in the blank, and then generation would be that they come up with a short answer or essay. Some other examples. Guided notes. Guided notes are what we are using in this component of the lecture to talk about what mediated scaffolding is. Your instructional format will change as the students become more efficient. So using mediated scaffolding in your teaching format ensures initial success for the students, and then you move into the independent generalized application. So, guided notes in detail. So, the definition of a guided note is a handout that directs the students through the material to be taught by the teacher. Students are actively responding to the contents lecture, and you are writing notes in specific places of the lecture while the lecture is being taught. These are things that the teacher deems as important or information that you should, bring your attention to, seeing it the first time, and then writing it down the second. Some important things with guided notes is you want to provide consistent cues. I have chosen to underline the things that are needed to be written down. Some teachers may use asterisks, bullets, different color. It's just important that it's consistent for the learner. And don't require your students to write too much or they quit listening. Another way to increase active student responding is using choral responding. This is when your class responds orally in unison to a problem or question. Choral responding can only be used in content when there is one correct answer, has short answers, and it's fast-paced. It is best to put lower performing students in the front of the class in order for you to hear their responses better. A lot of times students may whisper their answer waiting on the students around them to see what their peers are going to say before they answer. But this is a way that you can see all of your students using choral responding, and it has to be something that is what is the capital of South Carolina? Students, are you ready? And then you have a cue to have all the students say the answer at the same time. So when you're managing choral responding, you want to make sure that you're giving clear directions, providing that signal or pause. So tell students the type of response desired and model 1 or 2 trials. For example, listen, get ready, you're going to tell me the season that comes after fall. Get ready, I snapped, and students say, winter. And I say, yes, good job, winter. So I have provided feedback to the majority response because I said, yes, good job, and then I said the answer, winter. So that way the students are hearing not only yes, that they got it right, but they are hearing the correct answer in case they did not answer it correctly. So let the complexity of the question or problem and the student's level of mastery determine how long that pause would be. And you can do a quick arm movement or something. I used to use a snap because students knew after I snapped, get ready, hand up. Use a get ready signal if the thinking pause is longer than a few seconds. Whatever works for you, just be consistent. A couple other things is managing choral responding. You want to randomly call on individual students to respond because presenting the item first, then calling an individual student's name instead of giving the signal. This isn't where you're trying to catch them doing something wrong. This is where you want the students to all think of everyone has to know the answer. If they don't know if they're all going to be required to answer or just one particular student, because you want to make sure you have everyone's attention. If you say the student's name before presenting the question, for example, if I say, Dr. Witzel, what is the capital of California? The only person that listened to that entire sentence was Dr. Witzel. The rest of the students did not listen because they're off the hook. They are not answering this question. So you want to make sure that you don't risk the chance of losing those other students. So be prepared. Praise students for responding properly, and then also think of, group contingency plans for appropriate timed responses and silence. Here on this slide it says choral responding in action. I have a video of the different strategies that I'm showing you, and I will post those on Blackboard for you. So I love response cards. Response cards are cards, signs, or items that each student can hold up to display his or her answer. There are 2 types. Write-on response cards are which students can mark or write their own responses for each trial. You can use dry erase boards, laminated poster board, individual chalkboards. It's just something small the student has in their hand that they will physically write their answer on. Advantages of write-on response cards are listed here. And then some disadvantages are the lower rate of ASR, because pre-printed, which are the other type of response cards, you can get more answers. So example would be, okay class, what is the formula for the Pythagorean theorem? Everyone get out their cards, write your response, you give an appropriate wait time, and then you also have a signal here. All right, get ready, cards up, or you can say boards up, and then all the students hold up their response cards. Okay, so you look around the room and you look for a squared plus b squared equals c squared, and you can see all of your students at one time what their answer is. The other students don't see what they are holding over their heads. So therefore, you're able to know, oh, I really have a lot of teaching to do before all of my students know this formula, or great, we're all on the same pace here, no individualized instruction. You are able to really target what's going on at that particular moment in your lesson. So now we're going to look at some examples of the write-on response cards I was speaking of. Well, that's a video. I can't show that video, so I'm going to have to put that one on Blackboard too. I thought I would be able to embed it. So if you look at the next level of response cards, we have pre-printed response cards. These are already printed. Let's say we are teaching parts of speech or math operations. You can print those already on your cards, and the students will mark their cards and hold their cards up. I use this in my college classroom, and I have A, B, C, and D, multiple choice, on a pre-printed response card that I give to students the first day of class. And at the end of every class session, we spend 10 minutes on review of the day's lecture or content. And so the students have a paper clip or pen or their finger, and I say mark your cards, and they hold up A, B, C, or D, and they're pointing to the answer, and then I can gauge through an assessment of looking at all of the cards lifted on those 10 questions that I've asked at the end of the session if they really got the content in that particular lecture. Some advantages are the high rate of ASR. They are easy for a teacher to see, and disadvantages are their limitations to these responses, because they can only be, if you're using addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, you can only use that in certain components. But if you use the multiple choice with older children, that one may help too. I use this when I taught fire extinguisher or water when putting out a fire to do an assessment of my students of that particular lesson. And as you can see from this slide, they're all different examples of response cards. This research was done the top was done in North Carolina, the bottom was done in Ohio, and these teachers had all kinds of great ideas, teaching the seasons, teaching musical concepts, teaching different country components, the planets. There's no end to ways that you could use response cards in your teaching. So conducting response card sessions is a lot like choral responding. You have a cue for your cards up, you give a feedback for the majority response, and you want to keep the lesson short. And finally, we're going to look at cooperative learning. With traditional approaches to cooperative learning, not all students end up doing the work or are held accountable for the work, and there's too much downtime, and teachers find it difficult to manage groups. So we're going to look at two strategies: numbered heads together and peer tutoring. I love numbered heads together. I use it in my college classrooms. This is a cooperative learning activity that requires participation by everyone. So say you're sitting at a table of 4 students. I number every chair at the table, 1, 2, 3, and 4. Everyone at every table has numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4. Then I ask a question or present a problem. You as the students have to discuss it, write it, solve the problem, or come up with the answer. And then I roll a die or draw a number, and I come up with the number. So then I call on, okay guys, number 2. If you're sitting in number 2, if your head is number 2, please stand up. So all of those students stand up, and they have to discuss and solve that problem and describe how they solved the problem. So not only does every person in the group have to know the answer, but they have to know how the answer was derived. The second one is peer tutoring. This is when one student teaches another student. The advantages of this is it allows the teacher to circulate and monitor closely to performance, and students learn best when they're teaching it. And students enjoy both roles, and it increases academic skills and social interactions. One thing I didn't mention in numbered heads together is how that truly increases self-confidence, because think about Anytime you've worked in a group, there's always that dynamic leader that always takes on the role of the leadership. Well, in Numbered Heads Together, the person who may be the lowest performing student gets to stand up, describe the answer, know the answer, and be praised in front of all of their class. And so that helps with self-esteem, because sometimes maybe those students are not given that leadership role. And then we know the formats of peer tutoring: class-wide peer tutoring, small group, cross-age, and reciprocal. The next few slides are some examples of these cooperative learning strategies. This is a way for the peer tutors to check when the student is pronouncing the word correctly, breaking it up into parts or some other format, and then the self-monitoring, or it could be the peer monitoring chart at the bottom. Just tried to put a wide range of examples on here so you would see the different content components. And you can see the pluses and minuses from when the student got it correctly or incorrectly. The model lead test: teaching procedures: I do, we do, you do. This systematic instruction is an evidence-based practice. It's something that you have heard probably since you began a teacher ed program or a teacher prep program. You do it, we do it, I do it, we do it, you do it. Model lead test. Affirmation and retest. So if you are going to teach integers, here the teacher says, we are going to learn part of a new rule. Listen, my turn. The bigger number gets 2 dots. Say it with me. And the class says, the bigger number gets 2 dots. Now say it by yourself. You as the class say it. That's right, guys. The bigger number gets 2 dots. You know how to do this. Which number gets 2 dots? Okay, class, we're going to learn the last part of our new rule. The smaller number gets 1 dot. Say it with me. Great. The smaller number gets 1 dot. Say it by yourself. That's right. The smaller number gets 1 dot. I said not. Dot. So the smaller number gets 1 dot. So you know how to do this. So you see this was a super easy example of teaching procedures, and I think that I may have I think I may have started with this example and then went back to the greater than on the number. But the teaching integers, teaching students a rule, same type thing. Alright, so the last thing that I want to talk about quickly is Universal Design for Learning. How Universal Design for Learning gets us into that 21st century of teaching and learning, and incorporates clinical teaching, incorporates effective teaching strategies. It's the method, it designs instructional materials and methods that allows the learning goal to be achievable by a variety of learning differences. The Universal Design for Learning, of course, came around first in architecture. We had the Universal Design for Buildings, and it has, quickly moved into all facets. We are the Universal Design for Learning, Universal Design for Transition. We have lots of components to provide equal access for people of all ages and abilities, and access to learning, access to different components. But in this particular thing that we're talking, or this particular definition, is the instructional methods and materials for students. So, long time ago, 2001, No Child Left Behind required assessment for all students in reading, math, and science. This is just some information from a long time ago that you will see the evolution of Universal Design for Learning. So I talked to you a little bit about how we accommodated buildings, and then it was expanded into education because some tools were designed or developed to help teachers understand UDL in order to provide students access to the general curriculum. The most important the framework of Universal Design for Learning is multiple means of representation, multiple means of expression, multiple means of engagement. So if you look at multiple means of representation, this refers to the modification that can be made in a classroom that would make it more accessible to a student. There are some examples here. These are not comprehensive examples. It's just some things I pulled off the CAS website. Expression is how the students express themselves. How are they showing and expressing their mastery components? You can design any type of method of communication for a student with a disability. I would love to take time to teach you all about web-based 2.0 tools and using those for student engagement and teaching students how to use that technology to communicate communicate things for themselves and express their knowledge. Engagement is something that we spend a good deal of time talking about today. How the students can match their interest in learning and mode of presentation and response. And then that way the teacher gives them the opportunity and that balance. So this exact video here is a GoAnimate, which is a web-based tool for representation. And this is the exact same lessons that we talked about when we were doing greater than and less than, and also integers. We use that's two different math concepts into a video. These two students are talking to each other about those exact rules that we taught first. An example of using technology for expression is students sometimes have to be able to talk about expanded form and exponential form in math, and this is a way that students can use a cartoon strip online, or they can draw that to be able to demonstrate or show their mastery of that concept. One last example is a game for engagement. Here in this example, for every equation that the student solved correctly, they got to kick another soccer ball. So if you solved 10 correctly, you would get 10 chances to kick this ball into the goalie. This is a good activity for students who love technology, who love games, and this would motivate them to get those answers correct. So while those examples that I gave you are just examples of how to engage students, how to multiple means of engagement, expression, and representation, you want to go into your lesson when you're teaching it, see it, hear it, read it, do it. How can you incorporate those components into each and every lesson that you do? Because if you use those Universal Design for Learning components, then you would adhere to students' needs and really reach the students with disabilities that need those multiple means. So student diversity in general education, the accommodations needed, these are all things that you guys read and talked about in your last assignment. So I just wanted to briefly go over that. Modifying and accommodating are two different things. You know that you can modify things in high school, and when students get to college they no longer have the modifications. They can only have accommodations. So you want to know the difference between the two. Key concepts about placement in the law. You read about least restrictive environment and the guidelines for effective inclusion. Educational settings for students with disabilities can be the general education class, the resource classroom, a separate class, separate school, residential facility, or homebound or a hospital environment. These data that are on your screen are from 2012 and how students with a learning disability are educated in what placement. 52% are in the general education class and are included. 35% are in that pull-out classroom. 12% are in a separate setting, meaning that most of their day is with students with disabilities. And it's important to know what the United States Department of Education, or how they define these continuum of alternative settings. What a gen ed classroom is, and all the way, that's the least restrictive, all the way to the most restrictive, which means home bound or hospital, where a student is placed in receiving special ed services at their home or in a hospital. It's just good to know the definitions of those. Collaboration is a really big component in our field. We have to be able to work with general education teachers. We have to be able to work with families. We have to be able to make it work. Some strategies for effective inclusion in the general education classroom are listed here, and you have to be cohesive with the teachers that you are teaching with, but that doesn't mean that you have to be best friends. It just means that you use a team approach, you support each other, you plan for social experiences, you teach students appropriate classroom behavior, and then you're using the co-teaching strategies. You don't go into the classroom and wing it. You wouldn't want if you were going on a flight tomorrow to Barbados, you wouldn't want your pilot, who is a new co-pilot, to just wing it. You would want them to have a plan, and that flight is just important as the education of the children in your classroom. So you want to make sure that you do have a plan going into this. Parent rights. Free appropriate public education, the request for evaluation of their child. They can have their child tested in the language the child knows best, review all of their records. These are the things, there's a few more. These are more of the responsibilities or rights of the parent. Something that I wanted to point out, because this is personal experience, there are stages of a parent's reaction when a student is either diagnosed or labeled in either having a disability or some type of disorder. Parents are going to be in shock. They're going to be in disbelief. They're going to deny this. They're going to be angry. They're going to try to bargain. They're going to be depressed, and then eventually get to that acceptance level. But understand that you will be somewhere in that process with the parents, and you want to be mindful of the fact that this is as new to them as it is, and they don't know how to help their child, and they're going to blame someone. And sometimes you are going to have to help parents and collaborate, but at the end of the day, they are the expert of the child. You have to respect the fact that a parent is always the expert, and making sure that you value their opinion and collaborate and encourage them to be involved in their educational and IEP process. Be careful not to make the assumption that because a parent attends a meeting and sits quietly, that the goals and activities being developed will be accepted later when the rubber meets the road. Make sure you keep a normalized perspective on families who are experiencing this, because this emotion that accompany this are normal. Consider the family's strengths, not their deficiencies, and then make sure you are thinking about all of the components that this family is going through. And also, because a parent does not come to an IEP meeting or is not available at the time, you need to think about their schedule. This could be a single mother who works 8 to 6, and you're asking her to come in at 3:30 for a meeting, which is not her lunch break, nor is it a time that she is able to come in. She's going to have to make some child care arrangements for another child. She's going to have transportation. Be mindful of the things that you are asking parents to do. Make sure that all team members exhibit behavior during the meeting that is conducive to family involvement. Allow the parents and students to have leadership roles in this process. Give parents responsibilities to follow up with us, or just keep them in the loop. Provide anything that you can to help encourage family involvement. The more involved the family is, the better the outcomes are at school. So there are problems that you can encounter with family involvement, and they're listed here. Sometimes the unrealistic expectations, lack of general support. Sometimes you disagree with what students are able to do. I'm going to read a quote to you. It is, in a mobile, all the pieces, no matter what shape or size, can be grouped together and balanced by shortening or lengthening the strings attached, or rearranging the distance between the pieces. So is a family. None of the family members are identical to any other. They are all different and at different levels of growth. As in a mobile, you can't arrange one without thinking of the other. Parents must be assisted in understanding that they might not always like the decisions their child makes. So asking the students if their parents always agreed with their decision, the focus should be on the child, their progress at whatever level it is, but you are looking towards their future. The goal is student-centered, person-centered. You want to make sure that the parent feels involved in every step of the process.